The Muzaffargarh Field Firing Ranges. The 2nd of August 2025, Field Marshal Asim Munir, Chief of the Army Staff, stands at the edge of a live firing range watching a matte black helicopter with hexagonal angular fuselage banked low over the dust. It is the Z-10ME, built by China's Aviation Industry Corporation, and Pakistan has just become the first and only foreign operator, ending a search for a new gunship that had dragged on for 15 years. 9 months later, in May 2026, grainy footage starts circulating on defense accounts on social media. A Z-10ME Fierce Thunderbolt is seen flying low over forested terrain in the north, but this one is different. Mounted above its rotor hub sits a radar dome that was not there at Muzaffargarh. Something changed in those 9 months, and it changed quietly. 2 American helicopter deals collapsed on the way to the dusty range in Muzaffargarh. 1 Turkish deal collapsed too. 50-year-old Cobras are still flying alongside brand new Chinese gunships in the same army. So how does an air arm that has lost 3 separate procurement deals to 3 separate governments end up with arguably the most modern attack helicopter in South Asia? That is what we're unpacking today. You are watching Radar Mode on Pakistan Connect. I'm Qasim, and today we are climbing into the cockpit of Pakistan Army Aviation's strike and attack platforms. This is not a story about a single new helicopter. It is a story about what happens when your 2 closest suppliers, one American, one Turkish, both back out of contracts you've already signed checks for, and how a military rebuilds an entire fighting doctrine around that particular betrayal. There is no chest thumping here. This is procurement failure, engineering adaptation, and doctrine rewritten in real time. So let's get into it. For over 4 decades, the spine of Pakistan's Army Aviation strike capability has been the Bell AH-1F Cobra, a Vietnam-era design acquired through 1980s as part of the wider American security relationship built around the anti-Soviet campaign in Afghanistan. The Cobra's mission was simple and brutal. Fly low, hide behind a ridge, pop up just long enough to fire a tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missile at an advancing armored column. Then drop back below the terrain before anyone could shoot you back. That doctrine made sense in 1985. It makes considerably less sense in 2026. By the late 2010s, Pakistan's operational Cobra fleet has shrunk somewhat around 48 airframes, worn down by a decade and a half of intense counterinsurgency operations in North Waziristan and also the KPK. The airframes were structurally fatigued, the avionics were analog in digital airspace, and the aircraft had no meaningful electronic countermeasures against the heat-seeking man-portable air defense systems that have proliferated across every recent conflict on the planet. A helicopter designed to dodge 1980s air defenses was being asked to survive 2020s air defenses. And the maths simply does not work. Now, Pakistan Army and the Pakistan Army Aviation Corps knew this well. The Army spent the better part of the decade trying to replace the Cobra through entirely conventional, entirely Western channels. Both of these channels closed, one after the other. And that is where the story really begins. In April 2015, the US State Department approved a foreign military sale that looked on paper like it had solved Pakistan's Cobra problem for good. 15 Bell AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, 1,000 AGM-114R Hellfire missiles, which are more advanced than the TOW missiles that we've been using, targeting systems and support equipment worth an estimated $952 million, or almost $1 billion. Global analysts were genuinely surprised the sale had cleared Congress at all, given how politically toxic US-Pakistan defense sales had become at the time. 9 airframes were reportedly built by 2019, and then they sat. In 2017, the Trump administration froze the foreign military financing that was meant to underwrite the deal and told Islamabad to self-fund it instead. Pakistan walked away in an echo of the Pressler Amendment sanctions of the 1990s that had frozen an early generation of American F-16 deliveries. 12 Vipers, eventually retracted from the offer completely, ended up gathering dust at the 309 Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group Boneyard in Arizona. So Pakistan turned to a NATO ally instead. In 2018, Islamabad signed a $1.5 billion contract with Turkish aerospace industries for 30 T-129 attack helicopters, a Turkish-built derivative of the Italian A-129 Mangusta. Turkey is a treaty ally, the T-129 is combat-proven, and it was already flying with the Turkish land forces and the export customers, including the Philippines. The problem was the engine. The T-129 runs on twin LH-Tech T-800-4A turboshafts, a joint venture between America's Honeywell and Britain's Rolls-Royce. And any export of that engine still required a license from Washington. That license never came. The US approved the identical engine for a Philippines order for 6 helicopters worth about $280 million in 2021. Pakistan's much larger order sat frozen, extended again and again through 2020, 21 and into 22, entangled in Washington's broader dispute with Turkey over their purchase of the Russian S-400 air defense system. In January 2022, then ISPR Chief Major General Babar Iftikhar told reporters flatly that on the Turkish deal, in his words, we have moved on. 2 allied nations, 2 separate export control regimes, 2 vetoes on the exact same requirement, 7 years apart. Officers and planners who had come up through the institutional memory, seeing the F-16s being held back by the Pressler Amendment, watched the AH-1Z financing freeze in 2017 and recognized the shape of it immediately. While both the American-Turkish tracks stalled, Pakistan leaned on a small stopgap fleet of Russian-built Mi-35 gunships, the Hinds, first approved for sale by Moscow in November 2014. Never more than a handful of airframes useful for optics and limited operations, but never numerous enough to actually replace the Cobra's fleet at scale. It bought time, but it did not solve the problem. While Pakistan's Western options were dying on the vine, the entire concept of what an attack helicopter is for was being tested and reframed in real time over the fields of Ukraine. Russia entered its 2022 invasion with one of the largest attack helicopter fleets on Earth. According to open source tracking by the Oryx research group, Russia lost more than 50 attack helicopters in that single year alone. 50 attack helicopters down. Many of them to shoulder-fire missiles and mobile short-range air defenses that a low-flying gunship simply doesn't outrun or outmaneuver. The lesson for every aviation planner on Earth, not just Pakistan's, was blunt. Sending a helicopter alone and low into contested airspaces without networked sensors, without electronic warfare cover, without a way to strike from beyond the range of the enemy's shoulder-fire missiles, is no longer a viable way to fight. This is precisely the environment the old Cobra's doctrine was built for, and precisely the environment it can no longer survive. So whatever replaced the Cobra could not just be a newer helicopter with the same job description. It needed to be a different job description altogether. This is the context that matters when you hear Pakistan's officers talk about the Z-10ME program. Analysts following the induction have been explicit that the platform only makes sense of the surrounding doctrine, the inter-service coordination between the Army and the Air Force, and the data lake infrastructure are actually built out around by it, by the helicopter without building the network, and you have simply bought a very expensive target. Buy the network, and the helicopter becomes something closer to a flying sensor node that happens to carry missiles. Pakistan's planners appear to have understood that distinction from the outset, which is precisely why so much of what follows in this episode is about data, links, and radar, not just airframes. Enter the Z-10ME. Pakistan and China actually had tried this once before, and it did not go well. Back in 2015, Pakistan bought in 3 early model CAIC Z-10 helicopters for trials, and they were sent back. The verdict was that the underpowered WZ-9 engine, rated at about 930 kilowatts, simply did not deliver the altitude performance Pakistan's mountainous terrain required. China did not walk away from that failure. Chinese engineers spent the next several years re-engineering the platform, and by 2018, a new prototype, the Z-10ME, emerged with a larger ammunition load, a new missile approach warning system, and crucially, a far more powerful WZ-9C turboshaft engine delivering roughly 1200 kilowatts, alongside upward canted infrared suppressing exhaust nozzles and applique graphene composite armor panels. This was not the same helicopter Pakistan had rejected. It was fundamentally a re-engineered one, unveiled to the world for the first time outside China at the Singapore Air Show in February 2024, with Pakistan quietly named as its first and only export customer. The formal induction followed on the 2nd of August 2025 at Muzaffargarh, and open source estimates suggest Pakistan is building towards roughly 40 to 50 aircraft in the first tranche, enough to stand up a dedicated attack helicopter regiment with unit costs estimated in the range of maybe $15 to $25 million each, a fraction of the near billion-dollar price tags attached to the Viper, the newer Cobra, and the ATAK deals that fell through. The Z-10ME's real advantage, though, is not just the airframe. It is the CM502 kg missile it carries, a non-line of sight, top attack weapon with a standoff range reportedly exceeding 25 kilometers, alongside GR-5 guided rockets, FS-70B rocket pods, and the TY-90 air-to-air missiles for self-defense against enemy rotary wing threats. A gunship that can kill a target 25 kilometers away never has to fly into the range of fire of the enemy air defenses protecting it. That single number, 25 kilometers, is the entire doctrinal shift in one sentence. It is also worth understanding what this variant actually carries in terms of self-protection, because that is what makes the standoff number survivable rather than just theoretical. Open source defense analysis describes the induction standard Z-10ME as filled with a full defensive aids suite: radar warning receivers, laser warning receivers, a missile approach warning system, chaff and flare dispensers, and directional infrared countermeasures, sometimes paired with electronic countermeasures capable of radar spoofing and jamming. None of that existed in any meaningful form on the aircraft Pakistan rejected back in 2015. The airframe looks similar. The survivability picture underneath it does not. It is much, much improved. What about the Cobras? Here is where the story stops being about a single helicopter and starts being about a system. And it is also where we need to slow down and correct some of the loose claims floating around this topic. Because the real story is much more interesting than the tidy version. Pakistan Army Aviation has not retired the Cobra, it has repositioned it. Under the doctrine now taking shape, the Z-10ME operates high, using its electro-optical targeting system to scan the battle space and identify targets from a survivable standoff distance, while the older AH-1F Cobras work low, under the terrain line, under the radar coverage, ready to finish the job. We actually have a confirmed dated example of this pairing in action, rather than just analyst speculation. On the 16th of November 2025, at the Tilla firing ranges in Jhelum, Pakistan staged a combined arms exercise called the Radul Fatah. Newly inducted Z-10ME2 gunships and long-serving AH-1F Cobras flew and fired together in coordinated live profiles watched by the Chief Army Staff, Field Marshal Qasim Munir, Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and the visiting Jordanian monarch King Abdullah II. Reporting on the exercise describes exactly the split we would expect. The Z-10ME locating and engaging high-value armored targets at range, while the Cobras handled near-horizon suppression, mopping up exposed positions, and covering flanks. That is a real observed division of labor, not a doctrine paper. Now about the retrofits that the Cobras are going through. You will see claims online that the Cobras are getting Chinese digital data buses spliced into their American airframes. That specific claim does not hold up well under scrutiny. What Pakistan actually has, and has done for some years, is its own homegrown tactical data link system called Link 17, already used to network GF-17 fighters into a shared targeting picture. It is the same link that is connecting the GF-17s, the J-10Cs, and the rest of the Pakistani Air Force. If the Cobra is being folded into a networked kill chain, Link 17, not some Chinese bus architecture, is the far more plausible backbone. Because it is Pakistani infrastructure the army already owns and understands. So what is genuinely new? Not the airframe, not the sensors. What the Cobra gains in its second life is borrowed sight. It does not need its own radar or its own electronic warfare suite if something else flying higher and further away can see the battle space for it and hand down a target. The retrofit that matters is a connection not a component. An old gunship becomes relevant again not because it was rebuilt, but because it has inherited someone else's situational awareness. None of this happens in isolation with the Pakistan Air Force either. Even a Z-10ME operating at a standoff range from its own missiles is still flying inside the engagement envelope of a mobile ground-based air defense system, and a Cobra flying low beneath it is even more exposed. Analysts covering the program have pointed out that clearing safe corridors for these helicopters to operate as a genuine conventional scenario that would depend on PAF assets such as the JF-17s and the J-10Cs running suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses with anti-radiation missiles, opening a temporary window before that window closes again. That is the part of the story that rarely makes it to the press releases. A helicopter doctrine, hunter and killer both, that only works if the Air Force clears the sky first. Before we get to the main story, which is the radar, there is a structural problem worth naming, honestly, because there's just the kind of detail that gets lost in the induction ceremony coverage. Pakistan Army Aviation's wider helicopter fleet is a genuine patchwork. Puma transports from the 1980s, Bell 412s bought during the War on Terror years, heavy Mi-17 transports of the Russian lineage, and the new Chinese Z-10ME and old American Cobras, all operating side by side with almost no shared parts, training pipelines, or maintenance ecosystems. Defense analysts covering the program have pointed to this as a deeper issue behind the headline inductions. The most successful modern helicopter fleets in the world are built around commonality. The US Marine Corps AH-1Z and UH-1Y share roughly 85% of their components because they were designed together from the same H-1 upgrade program. Turkey is pursuing the same logic by putting the indigenous TS-1400 engine into both the Gurkbe utility helicopter and eventually its ATAK helicopter gunship. China is doing something similar with the Z-20 and the Z-21 family. Pakistan, by contrast, is running 5 or 6 distinct helicopter lineages at once, each with its own spares pipeline, its own maintenance culture, and its own points of failure. India has actually solved a version of the same commonality problem already. Its Prachand light combat helicopter is built on the same indigenous Dhruv airframe lineage as its utility and naval helicopters, all developed by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited under one roof with one domestic chain supply and one maintenance protocol. The HAL Dhruv platform, although riddled with problems from severe vibrations in its transmission systems, leading to component fatigue and dangerous control failures that have led to multiple groundings and a long list of crashes over time. Compound that with consistent delays on orders by HAL. Still, an indigenous pipeline ensures numbers, however unreliable the platform. Now back to that May 2026 footage we opened with. The radar dome sitting above the rotor hub is what analysts call the Hu millimetre-wave radar, or the MMW radar. And it is the single biggest capability jump in the entire story. Mast-mounted radar, which is the radar that is on top of the rotor. It means the helicopter can hide its entire fuselage behind a ridge line or a tree line and expose only that small dome above the rotor to scan the entire battle space. Exactly the same way as the American AH-64D and the AH-64D Apache Longbow have operated for over 2 decades. Analysts refer to this tactic as peek and strike. The Hu radar reportedly offers 360 degrees coverage, 360 degrees target acquisition, with the depth ranges approximately 20 to 25 kilometers, even through dust, smoke, fog, or the kind of low visibility mountainous conditions that define much of Pakistan's western and northern terrain. Some analysts are informally calling this upgrade configuration the Z-10ME2. Whatever the label, the practical effect is that Pakistan Army Aviation now has a helicopter that can find a target without ever showing itself and hand that target either to its own onboard missiles or down the chain to waiting Cobras below. That is the difference between a 1980s gunship and a genuine 21st century combat node. The China-Pakistan friendship gets a lot of attention, but the Turkish story did not actually end when the T-129 order collapsed. It evolved into something arguably more interesting and more permanent. Turkey's own military has watched the same American engine veto strangle its exports ambitions, and its answer was to simply stop needing American engines. Turkish Aerospace Industries' sister company, TUSAA Engine Industries, has already begun developing an entirely indigenous turboshaft, the TS-1400. Back in March 2017, That engine has since been flight tested aboard the TAI-625 Kirkbait utility helicopter, passing the European Aviation Safety Agency endurance certification testing in 2024 at a rating of 1740 shaft horsepower. And it is on track for full international certification by this year. The Kirkbait itself is a 6-ton twin-engine, 12-passenger utility helicopter built specifically for the kind of hot, high-altitude mountainous conditions that define Pakistan's northern western terrain. With a cruising speed of about 306 kilometers an hour and a service ceiling above 6,000 meters. In July 2025, Turkey's own Presidency of Defense Industries signed a 57 aircraft production order with deliveries beginning in 2028. All of them fitted with that same indigenous sanctions-immune TS-1400 engine. This is where Pakistan re-enters that picture. Since August 2023, Pakistan's National Aerospace Science and Technology Park, or NASTP, has hosted a research and development agreement with Turkish drone maker Baykar, and in January 2025, at the 8th Pak-Turk Industrial Fair Joint Working Group meeting held at the NASTP itself, both governments discussed a joint helicopter co-production program built around the Turkey's TS-1400 engine. Nothing here runs through Washington. No American company holds veto power over a single component because there is no American component left in the loop for them to veto. That is the real price. Not just a new aircraft, but a supply chain that cannot be frozen by a congressional hold or an ITAR denial later, with the added possibility of a genuine assembly and overhaul line built inside Pakistan itself. There are discussions, a standing R&D relationship at NASTP, and a shared engine program. Both countries have a very good reason to want to succeed. But the direction of travel matters as much as the paperwork. Turkey solved its own veto problem by building an engine nobody else controls, and Pakistan is positioning itself to inherit that solution rather than repeat the T-129 experience a second time with a different aircraft. Now let's step back and look at the whole board. Pakistan Army Aviation lost a $952 million American helicopter deal to a financing freeze. It lost a $1.5 billion Turkish helicopter deal to an American engine veto placed on its own ally. And in the space between these two failures, it built something that arguably did not exist in this region before. A genuinely networked, high-low attack helicopter doctrine running Chinese sensors and missiles above retrofitted American airframes, with a second entirely sanctions-immune utility helicopter track now taking shape with Turkey. For context, India currently operates 22 AH-64E Apache Guardians, roughly 30 Mi-35 Hind gunships, and has 66 indigenously built Prachand light combat helicopters on order, a fleet built with far fewer supply chain interruptions. Pakistan's path here has been messier, slower, and far more improvised. The fleet commonality problem we raised earlier, and the fact that Pakistan has not announced any follow-ups to the Z-10ME order for more than a year after the first induction ceremony. That silence is not necessarily hesitation. It may be an institution refusing to repeat its own history, buying in haste and then sorting out the doctrine afterwards. In fact, sources have suggested a plan for 50-plus airframes with a future option for indigenous assembly and production in Pakistan. Whether a networked hunter-killer doctrine built from necessity, running on a patchwork fleet with no shared parts bin, can actually match a fleet built from continuity is a question only time will answer. But we're confident and hopeful that the planners in the Army Aviation Corps know what they're talking about and have a good reach on the doctrine that they're developing. That's all from Radar Mode this week. If our show helps you make sense of stories like this one, the ones that don't get covered anywhere else in this kind of depth, the best way to support the show is simple. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, share this with someone who'd find it interesting, and drop a comment. We genuinely read every one of them, and that is the way we shape our next program. My name is Qasim. You've been watching Radar Mode on Pakistan Connect. I'll see you in the next one.